Services and Business Development for Raymond. We are a business advisory firm. If you do know us around here for a longer time, most people see us as a CPA firm, which we absolutely are. Tax and insurance is kind of our bread and butter. We do a lot of other work outside of that: wealth management, corporate investigative services, a lot of outsourcing, which is under Tara's realm, but we do some HR, IT, and CFO outsourcing as well. So I'm here to introduce Tara. She has been a principal CFO advisor for Raymond, actually, for a couple of years, but she's been doing this for a little over 20 years. And we're here to talk about strategic planning, give you some tips on the strategic planning, but really it's the driver behind the strategy is that CFO. So she's here to talk a little bit about that. Tara, anything else?
I think that was good, Christy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming this morning on this lovely jury day. So please, I want this to be interactive. If you have questions, you want to have discussion, stop at any point. I don't have to talk at you the whole time. I have some slides where I'm going to try to get you to answer some questions and talk with me, but please, at any point in time, feel free to chime in. Christy, you want to move forward here? So our agenda, we want to talk about some of those barriers that are in the way. What are the challenges that businesses are facing? What is a CFO? What does that mean? We want to talk about that. What should your CFO be doing for you? And maybe what are some of those other roles that they should be doing? We'll talk a little bit about what an outsourced CFO is versus the traditional CFO. And we have some case studies to talk through. I'm usually a big fan of having, here's some real life examples. A lot of times when you just have a lot of words we go through, it doesn't make sense until you hear those examples. So I certainly want to talk through some of those, and we have some time for questions at the end, but like I said, please feel free to interact at any point in time. Just a quick bio slide. I'm not going to read that to you. Christy already kind of gave that introduction, but CFO services is something that I've done for many years. I do have a tax background, started in tax, but quickly moved into CFO services, where I do a lot of different CFO work for a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries. Okay, so here's your interaction. We're ready. So tell me, in the last year, when any of you have thought, or maybe those on your team have said, gosh, if I could just take a week's vacation right away from real work to get all my to-do lists done. You have to-do lists at home too, I'm sure, but we're just talking about work, right? So your to-do list at work, how many of you said, man, if I could just have that, that would be great? Right? Yeah. Just you, no one else? Yeah. Of course, right? Like, we all have that. That was our little, if you need a time machine. If we could just have this time machine, we can maybe pause time, we can go back in time, we can get our to-do list done. It's not feasible, because think about it, even if you did take that time off, which if that's how you take time off, I'll explain to you what a real vacation is. But if you take that time off, what's not getting done while you're doing that? There's always things that have to get done. So you can prioritize and focus on that to-do list, but all those things that you should have been doing on the day-to-day are now also not getting done. So now you have to get in that cycle, as you all understand. So this is a quote you maybe have heard: the time to repair the roof is when the sun is still shining. Obviously, pretty clear as to what that means. So what are some barriers that are in the way? I'm sure you guys could talk a lot about some of these barriers, and you may be facing all of these, at least some of them. The labor market, tough. We want to say it's getting slightly better, maybe, but it's tough out there. It's tough to find the right people for those right positions to help you get the things done, get things off your plate, because you have someone in the position that can do them. Affording those people are very difficult as well, or the cost that it is to retain the people that you have. Inflation is a big one. You're either suffering from inflation because you are having to pay people more, your materials that you're getting in cost more. Maybe you're able to charge more on the other side, hopefully, but still that's just to keep you even, probably not to improve things. It's a big impact. And is it going to get worse? Could. We, of course, all hope it doesn't, but what about that potential recession? probably happens as inflation continues to get worse, which, some economists are saying it's going to happen, it's going to be mild. Others are saying, no, we're going to come back out of it. Hard to say, 50-50, right? But regardless, it's out there. And oh yeah, by the way, time, that's a big issue we all have. So I'm curious to some of your thoughts on the difference between kind of a controller and more of a high level CFO. And this is really where we're going to start talking about how do we have a strategic plan? How do we make sure we have the right things in place? How do we make sure we're doing what needs to be done and have the right people on our team? So there's not a wrong answer here. This is just kind of for discussion. Can someone kind of throw out to me where you see the difference between what I call a controller, maybe a bookkeeper controller, and a true CFO? And I don't think we have anyone in here that is in that role other than Jeff.
I don't know. Jeff obviously would be better served to answer this, but I think a CFO might maybe help you more strategically, big picture. I don't know. Controller more day-to-day stuff.
That's an excellent answer.
Thank you.
Anyone else thoughts? Such a good answer. I don't know if we're going to get anyone else. It's very true. And then we put it right in front of you because you'll pick it up in your Definitely big part of it, right? So controllers in that day to day. So tell me when you're ready for a CFO. When is your organization ready for that higher level versus just needing that kind of day to day? You're all feeling like it's a trick question, are you?
Well, I mean, if you're looking for, I think you're always ready for one. You should always have someone, you should always try to be doing that. It's just hard to do, like you said.
Yeah, for sure. I would argue that you kind of always need it. Yes, please.
I think the size of the organization is going to matter. I think that every organization probably could use a CFO, at least part-time. But I think it depends on ownership or leadership and what they're willing to let the CFO be responsible for. If you have an owner that wants to be in the weeds of all the financial needs of a company on a day-to-day and macro and micro, whatever, I think whoever you have as a CFO won't be there long because they don't have the ability to do their role.
Sure.
But that CFO is really there to strategically plan, to know everything about the financial strengths of the company and be able to look forward, look ahead in order to avoid cliffs or pitfalls and navigate around those and through those challenges that will certainly come in every company.
And I think I'll sit down now because that was the presentation. That's great job. Love it. Good setting the stage. Absolutely. And I think that's a big piece too. So we talked about having the time. So if the owner is really diving into all of those weeds, that they should have another individual that's focusing on that. What are they leaving undone? And how do they have the time to make sure those things are happening? Or who's doing that? Who's doing those pieces? So Christy, let's just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page. I think we are from some of this conversation, but that CEO, that owner, that individual that's just really charged with leading the company, they need to be focused on making the right decisions. How do we make sure, the right resources in the right place, and how are we making decisions? But they're not the ones that are gathering all of the data necessarily to make the decisions. They have that CFO, that right-hand person, really focusing on the strategy. How do we make sure we have the right things in place? We're reporting on the right things and providing that to that CEO, that decision maker, to be that team together making those decisions. Without that, those pieces are left hanging out there. And no one's making the right decisions, most likely, unless they're getting lucky. And, just really, what is the plan? How are we making sure we have a plan? How are we making sure that plan is happening? That's what needs to get done. That controller level, that's a very vital part of any organization. We need someone that's focusing on that day-to-day. Are the numbers right? It's great to have a plan in place, but if the numbers are wrong, what are we planning on? We're not even looking at good information. So it's great to have that person in there that's really making sure we have a good month-end close process. Numbers are looking good. We're reporting on the right things. We have the controls in place. All of that is really, really important. But stopping there, you're not getting all the information you need to have a true plan. We're just having good numbers, but we're missing all those next steps. So typically, almost never, can your controller also be your CFO? They probably don't have the time, but B, it's typically a different skill set. Someone that's more focused on that day-to-day activity, really focused on the details, is most likely not someone who also can then step out of that and look at the big picture and make sure we're planning things strategically. And then, of course, we'd have a bookkeeper, just that day-to-day. That's the person that's paying the bills. They're invoicing the customers. They're just making sure that things are in there to the best of their ability. That controller is then that overseer of that. I've seen so many organizations that try to have the bookkeeper be the CFO, the controller be the CFO, and not that they're not a part of that, but again, it's really difficult to make them be that endpoint. So just wanted to kind of put us all on the same page as we talk through this and where those levels may be. So let's dive a little bit more as to what the CFO should do for you. How does the CFO help make sure the plan is in place? What are the pieces of that plan, that strategy we're putting together? They got to be driving value. And it's funny because the CFO is just an overhead, right? Like, they're not part of bringing money in, but gosh, they really need to make sure they're driving value. How do they make sure that we are looking at things? How do we improve? Always improving efficiencies. I would argue if you have a CFO and you're a manufacturing organization, they better be going on the other side of the wall, so to speak, a lot. I've seen some organizations that the CFO's office is on the other side of the wall. It's right there in the middle of the shop floor. They don't know what's going on. They don't see these things happening. They don't understand the business. Really hard to plan and make decisions or provide support for decisions. If you're a sales company, if you're some sort of providing a service, they need to understand what that is. What does that look like? How does that work? How do we bring in customers? How do we bring in revenue? What does that process look like? How can we improve that? All of those things are very, very important that a CFO understands. And then just really, how do we improve profitability? How do we maximize the revenue? They can't just wave their magic wand and do that, of course. I mean, it'd be great if they could, right? But what they can do is look at it. They need to be diving into it. What are some areas that we can maybe improve on? What do our costs look like? How is the cost of what we're doing relating to the widget we're producing, the service we're providing? What does that look like? How can we maybe make it faster? How can we make it cheaper? Could we sell it for more? What's the market conditions? All of those things, that's information that a business owner, a CEO, they need to know that. They don't have time to do that, they don't have time to be digging into that, but that needs to be part of that strategic plan. Always looking at that, always growing. What about that long-term outlook? That's your strategic plan, right? That needs to be 5 years. Can't just look 5 years. We got to be looking, 6 months, a year, 3 years. What does that look like? A piece of that is your budget, or I might call that a financial model, a forecast. So many people have that as their end goal. We've checked it off. We did our budget. We're good. Our plan's in place. Hate to tell you, that's like step one. That's really the foundation of it. It's very, very important that you have it, and it's important that you put effort into it. It can't just be, well, same as last year. Oh, maybe 5% more than last year. You really need to put some energy into it. Make it as dynamic as you possibly can. I build a lot of models for my clients, and when I do it, I do try to make it as dynamic as I possibly can for those what ifs. What does it take to drive revenue? How is that happening? What if that doesn't happen? So let's say we're a service-based company, and we say for every 10 customers we meet with, we win 7, and we have maybe an average of $100 in revenue, right? What happens if for every 10 I only get 4? What happens if my average revenue isn't 100 anymore? It's 75. If you build your model dynamic enough, you can play with some of those scenarios. You can start to think through things, and it really helps. Again, with that foundation as to what we think is going to happen. And I will argue all the time, if you don't have a plan in place, everything looks okay. And I want you to kind of think back to your days when you took a test, college, high school, certification, whatever, right? Let's say that you studied really, really hard, you pay attention in class, all of those things. You take the test and you're like, oh, that was hard. It was a really, really hard test. I was debating on some of these answers. That was tough. Let's say Christy, because she didn't study or anything. Christy took that same test. She skipped class all the time. She never studied. She gets out of the test. She skipped class all the time. She was, she's the business developer. She's the outgoing partier. So Christy takes the test. Christy and I talk, and Christy says to me, "Man, that test was easy. I just buzzed right through that. Super easy." My point is, when you have no idea, you never attended class, you never studied, you don't know anything. Sure, that looks right. Everything, yep, perfect, all good. You have no idea. You know the difference. She failed that test, right? I probably got an A on that test, but I was stressed out. I wasn't sure. I was debating because I knew it. I knew the information. So when you have a plan in place, it helps you understand what's happening. This looks wrong. I'm not sure this is the direction we want to go. When there's no plan in place and things are just going, oh, everything's fine. We're great. All is good. Are you? Good until you're not. And then what? What do you do? It just feels like common sense, but it's something that gets backburnered all the time because guess what? There's not enough time. So we just, there's the budget. Okay, our system will just roll it forward and there's our plan and okay, we're good to go. So you're not. And that's the big thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too, but just want to touch on the 13-week cash flow. That's another piece of it as well. If you don't have a 13-week cash flow, I really recommend you do that. This is something that just helps you plan. This is obviously more of a short-term planning, but it does need to be part of just your overall strategy and what you're doing. If you don't have a good plan on how are we going to pay our bills, how are we going to make sure, if we're looking to invest in something, how does that fit into our cash flow plan? How are we managing our cash on a day-to-day? How are we managing for the unexpected? Because guess what? The unexpected needs to be as expected as it possibly can be so that you have a plan. Go ahead. So some other, insights that I think your CFO really can have is, again, driving that process. So a piece of that we talked a little bit about is just how are we making decisions? Are we looking to invest in a new piece of equipment? Are we looking to expand a product line? Are we going to add a location? Are we going to close a location? All these things, how are we making those decisions? Because if we don't have a plan to make those decisions, we're still making decisions. We're saying yes or no based off of something, based off of our gut, based off of just, John said to do it. John's usually pretty good. Let's just go ahead and buy that $1 million piece of equipment. We'll be good to go. Should be fine. Again, until it's not. That's a big piece, though. We really want to make sure that we have that as part of our plan. Who's providing the information to make those decisions? What does that look like? How do we know? How do we know if it's right? Where does that fit into our plan? What happens if we buy that now? What does that impact down the road? How do we know? This is back to my exam, understanding the who, the what, the why, and what's going on. So you're building a model, you're building a budget. It's wrong. It's going to be wrong. It's a forecast, right? It's never going to be right. But it is something that helps you understand what you thought was going to happen. And now, why is it not happening the way I thought it was going to happen? What's going on? How do I react to this? Is it better than I thought? Is it worse than I thought? And why? We can't just be, well, it's better than we thought, so, oh, good, everything's great. I'm not worried. Well, good, but still, why? What changed? What's happening? What can we do about that? What do we need to be doing? Where do we need to have our focus? Because it's different. So again, back to my exam analogy. If I didn't study and I thought everything was fine, then whatever course my business is going, everything is fine. It's good. If I have that plan in place, just because it's not going the way I thought it planned it would go, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's different, and now why? Why is it different? What do I need to do? And again, as the business owner, as that CEO, you need to be high level. You just need to be part of those conversations. It's the CFO's job to say, hey, this is what's happening. This is why it's happening. This is what's going on. These are the variances. Let's kind of talk through, this is where I think we should have our plan be. Okay, great. Let's compare that to our strategic plan. Let's make sure that this is still in line, or how do we adjust the course? Just those constant opportunities for improving profitability, liquidity. The more you can do that, the better off that you are. And we have up here too this false optimism and pessimistic paralysis. Tongue twister. So, false optimism. It's great when everyone's happy and everyone thinks everything's going well. But what happens when it's not? Christy was very falsely optimistic after her exam that she took that she then failed because she didn't know and everything was fine. And you also can be so pessimistic that you're afraid to do anything. Well, it's just everything's plummeting around us. It's terrible. We just give up. Well, yes, no one has a magic wand, and there are times, unfortunately, where things are really, really bad. And no matter what you do, it can be almost impossible to get out. But I will tell you, the more you have a plan in place, the more there's a strategy, the more that you have support, you have the right people in place, the sooner you can see that coming, and the sooner you can adjust to avoid those pitfalls. But if you're too afraid to do something, then you end up stuck. But your confidence comes from the plan that you have in place. You have to have a plan for disaster. You have to have a plan for contingencies. And I would say 3 years ago, we'd say, we're in Northwest Ohio. We don't get hurricanes. We don't really get floods. We don't really get tornadoes. We don't really get earthquakes. Those are the disasters that occur in our world. We don't really get those. I'm not too worried. Chances of a disaster impacting my business, pretty rare, pretty slim. Not gonna worry a whole lot. Maybe you're in an industry that could be impacted by those because you're in other places of the country or the world. But otherwise, you're not worried about it. Well, COVID taught us a lot of things. And COVID taught us that no one's exempt. And the unexpected needs to be expected. And some people benefited from it and others did not. But regardless, shame on us now if we don't take it seriously, that these things can happen. That anything can impact our business. And if we don't have a plan in place that we can react quickly, it's great to say, okay, disaster's looming. Let's spend time. We want to make sure we're making the right decisions. We need to spend the next 3 months putting a plan in place and getting it all laid out nicely. Great idea, except for the world's falling down around you and you're bleeding money throughout those 3 months because you don't know what to do. Of course, the opposite to that is having that plan already in place so that you have some decisions to make. It's still going to be fast decisions. It's still going to be, things are not going to be exactly what you thought in your contingency plan, but you had some ideas, you had things in place. Your strategy is helping lead the way. You have to be prepared. What about cyber attacks? Does anyone worry about cyber attacks in here?
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah. So So cyber attacks used to be, yeah, that's for the big guys. Don't have to worry about that. Not anymore. Everyone needs to have a cyber attack plan, and that needs to be part of your strategic plan. You might think, well, that's IT. They worry about that. Well, yeah, you need to have someone good in your IT team worrying about that. I haven't mentioned this yet, but your CFO needs to be part of the team. They said, yeah, they gotta go on the other side of the wall. Yeah, but they need to be part of what's HR doing? What's IT doing? What is the owner leadership doing? What are all these departments doing? How does this all interact together? How is our strategic plan as a company, not just that accounting, that finance team? It's a big part of it. Talking about HR, what is HR doing? We talked about this labor being an issue. What's in the budget? Can we give our people retention bonuses? Can we give them raises? We really like this guy. We need to bring him in as a CFO. Probably a bad example, because we should have a good CFO. We need to bring him in as the operations lead. Can we afford him? He wants a lot of money. We think he's great. He checks all of our boxes, but whew, he wants about 30% more than what we thought. Can we do it? Well, we can either say, well, we can't afford to not. Okay, maybe. What if we had a plan? What if we could go back and look at that plan? And what does that look like? What is the impact of that happening? Should we make that decision? Making sure that HR understands that piece of it as well. Okay, so that's what you need. Everyone's, yeah, great, perfect. Can't take a week off and make it happen. You might be fortunate that you have a CFO in-house. Wonderful, fantastic. I hope you're getting all of these things and more, because there is more. This really is just kind of the high level strategy. There's so much more that a CFO can and should be doing. It's great if you have that person. Maybe you are looking to hire that person. Helps give you some support as to what you need to be looking for when you hire them. Another option is outsourcing. And that's just something I want to kind of talk about if you haven't learned of outsourcing and what that might be. A big piece of it is capacity. Capacity means experience and knowledge. Capacity also means time. So just because that full-time CFO is really, really smart and they know how to do all of the things and more, do they have a time machine? Do they figure out how to do it? Because I guarantee there's a lot on their plate. Or there's pieces that they just aren't as strong in and they could use a little bit of support. That's a great time for outsourcing. Or in that interim time, so we're looking to hire someone, we're not quite there, outsourcing is a great time there as well. So here's the, is it really necessary? This is back to our, who needs it? Anyone want to say you're too small to need all these things? Does anyone dare? I think a lot of you probably, you have the benefit of being part of an organization like the Family Business Center where you get to talk to each other. You have other colleagues you talk to. And one thing I would imagine you're recognizing through there that I know I certainly see in my own client base, doesn't necessarily matter the size of the organization. They're all the same issues. It's just more zeros at the end for others. The cost of it may be different, but the issues are all there. Everyone's having these issues. So I really struggle to say you're too small. Now you may be too small to need a full-time CFO with this skill set. A full-time CFO with this skill set is very expensive. So yes, you are too small to need a full-time CFO with this skill set. I will agree with that. You're not too small to need the skill set. There's a difference. How about it's too expensive? It is expensive. And again, you might be too small to need that full-time position. But you might also be big enough that you need that full-time position and stop relying on your controller, stop getting frustrated with your controller that they don't have the skill set because they shouldn't. If they're a good controller and they focus on details, then they can't also be a person that can focus on the strategic plan and step outside of that. Very few people's brain works both ways. How about this one? I'm making money. Everything's good. I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot. Things are going just fine. We're making good money, got good liquidity, everything's fine. No, it's not. And that's the thing. Could you make more money? Do you want to make more money? Do you want to be confident in the decisions that you're making versus just making decisions? How can we make sure that's happening? Because you know what, everything probably is fine. You're making money. So yeah, you're covering your costs, things are going well, everything is fine. But we don't live in a vacuum. There's all these other things that can impact. What decisions are you making? Why are you making them? Are they right or wrong? How do you know? You sleep at night saying, yeah, I'm very confident in every decision I just made. If you can, good. And you can if you have a lot of these, if you have a nice strategic plan in place, if you're following it, if you're referencing it, if you didn't just write it and check it off and set it on the shelf, we're actually referencing it and going through it, for sure. Maybe I don't understand all that stuff. I'm just the CEO, I'm just the owner. I don't understand it, I don't really care, it's not important. Not for me. Shame on you. Don't be that way if you want. This one too, I don't need more ways to spend money. Totally get that. Especially in these times, inflation, pending recession. I do not need to spend any more money. Well, I agree, but sometimes it's money well spent. It's money that's getting you a plan so that as that recession hits, you now have a plan and you feel better. And one thing that I've been in my career, I've done a lot of industries, but manufacturing is an area I focused heavily on. And one thing I loved always about manufacturing is a lot of times manufacturers are in small communities, and those small communities employ the whole town. And sometimes, mom and dad are both working there, or just one spouse, whatever is working. That industry closes its doors. The entire community is gone. And that's something that I've always loved, being able to help those businesses and help make sure they're making the right decisions so that doesn't happen. It's not all about money in pockets of high up people. It's also about keeping all of those people employed, keeping them going. It's a big part that, is a responsibility of those in leadership of organizations to think about the families and the lives that are being impacted below them if they don't make the right decisions too. It's a lot of stress, for sure. So a little bit, what is an outsourced CFO? Quickly, just kind of go through this. Okay. Outsourced CFO can function as part of the team, just really providing value, that bandwidth. So we talked about capacity is time, capacity is that knowledge, that experience. So that's someone that can step in and provide the time to get some of those to-do list items, to provide the expertise that someone doesn't have. Maybe, we still need that full-time CFO, but they don't have the time to do it all. They don't have the skill set to do it all, but we still have that help. Or we really are too small. We don't need that full-time person. Excuse me, we cannot afford, have the need for. There's no reason to pay that salary of that full-time person. It makes so much more cost-effective sense to have someone on a part-time basis, because that's what we need. We need 20 hours a month. We need 40 hours a month. We don't need 40 hours a week of someone of that skill set. Closing that gap. Another part is transition. One of our I think a couple of our case studies, we talk about some transition occurring. Second, third, fourth, whatever generation coming in. A lot of times that CFO that's been there for 20 or 30 years might retire with that change of generation coming in. Well, that person's leaving a lot of knowledge, taking a lot of that knowledge with them. Kind of stuck. What do we do? How do we bridge this gap? How do we make sure the new person coming in is set up to where they need to be? And maybe that person that's been here for a long time, although they're great, maybe they were lacking in doing some of these things, so we're falling more into that controller role. How do we step that up to make sure that full-time person we bring in is in the right spot? What does that look like? And just that leadership. Maybe you're lacking some of that financial leadership. You as the business owner know how to run your business. You're really, really good at that. But maybe you're lacking some of that leadership needed in that financial area just because you don't have the knowledge, and that's okay. Again, a lot of people can't think about all of these things. You can be really, really great at being an entrepreneur and running your business. Doesn't mean you can do all of these things that a CFO should be doing. different knowledge and skill sets. Important to have that team. The end goal was that you're faster, you're more efficient, you're more effective. Case study, we have a couple of them for you. Again, everything I said was like, how does that fit in? How does that relate to me? I'm hoping these case studies might kind of help a little bit as well. This was a fluid applicator manufacturer. They have about 15 million annual revenue, transitioning from second to third generation, 25% operating income. So everything's okay. We're doing good. No need to worry. They had a controller who was, kind of functioning really as a bookkeeper, pretended to be controller, pretended to be CFO. They're exiting the company after being there for many years. So originally they just kind of asked us to come in. Can you just assess this finance function? New generation coming over. We just want to make sure that things are set up right. Everything looks good. When we bring a new controller in, we want to make sure it looks good. Okay, we'll do that. And as we dive into it, we start talking about, okay, well, this is how it needs to function. And they had an ERP system. If you're a large enough organization, you might have an ERP, a larger software system versus just like a QuickBooks or something. ERPs are something that's very important that a CFO should understand as well. Utilizing that system. So this was a big piece too. It's just, how are we using the system? Because I see a lot of expensive ERP systems with a lot of expensive Excel spreadsheets. Because we're not staying in the system. So this is what we were doing, is really trying to integrate that in. And we eventually ended up just really diving into this particular one and making sure that was set up. So then we helped hire a new CFO to come in. And the nice thing is you get to kind of hand it to that new CFO with a nice little shiny bow on it, and everything's been put together. And now that person, instead of spending so much energy and effort doing all of that while their to-do list accumulates, they're able to really jump in and have a business cycle that's working well, good information, and they can start being that support that you really need. This one, heavy equipment rental company, 8 to 10 million. Again, transitioning, a lot of second to third generation transitions. They had a controller, gonna retire. Gosh, we see that all the time too. Controllers that pretend to be CFOs, and nothing against them. They just don't have the capacity to go beyond that. At first, they wanted us to help with just that month-end close support in doing the day-to-day. And just to back up, so you understand this case study, as Christy mentioned, we do a lot of outsourcing. So we can outsource a whole accounting function. So we have day-to-day, we have controllers, we have CFOs. This particular one, that's what we were doing. CFOs would not be doing the month-end close process. But we did the whole transaction for them, supported any implementation of their softwares, their operations. Software is great. And I will tell you all day long that software can make your life easier, but you can't allow the software to tell you what to do. You have to understand it. You have to know what to tell it. So it's really important that things are set up correctly. Otherwise, it's not easy. So that was a lot of what we were doing there. This particular company was struggling with their debt service coverage. They were trying to get financing. Back up, having a strategic plan really helps get financing too, by the way, because the time to fix the roof is when the sun is still shining. So the time to ask money for the bank is when, to ask the bank for money is when you don't need it, which is what your strategic plan can tell you. I'm going to need it. Here, Mr. Banker, I'm going to need it. This is when I need it, and this is how I'm going to pay for it. That's what we were able to help them do, put together that 13-week cash flow so they really understand their cash flow cycle, and then they were able to get some financing. Last one, just to kind of show, I don't know that we have any nonprofits, but nonprofit is a really big area that you see the wrong people in the wrong seats. Many nonprofits have great passion. The people, that are working for them have amazing passion. They don't always have the expertise needed for the role that they're in. And that's kind of where we're at with this particular one. And we were helping just do that, check the box. We needed to close the year, and we needed to do a budget for the next year. Well, we of course quickly helped them understand that we can't just check the box. Just having that budget in place is not enough. And we really started just really, stepping in and being that CFO, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different companies. anyone that's stepping in, a CFO is never a cookie cutter, so it's really important that, that's understood as well. And then just really helping them make good decisions. And I worked really, really hard to not say my quote, because if you've ever heard me talk, you've heard me say this, so it was really hard for me to not say it at any point in time. So I'm leaving it for now. So what I always say is that decision makers make the best decisions they can with the information they have. If you have better information, you make better decisions. Of course you would. So that's your CFO. Your CFO is the person that needs to provide the information to make better decisions, to help you put together that plan. Who has the first question?
I do.
Yes.
I do. So is your CFO almost like your chief strategy officer?
Yes, that is a big piece of it. Absolutely. They should be the person that's feeding everything into your strategy. They have the numbers, they have the support, they see the big picture.
I think and it might have been in a Raymond presentation, when you mentioned cybersecurity, am I correct in saying oftentimes you see like family-owned business or smaller businesses might have an IT team, but they're really doing like the desktop stuff, the
Yes.
new computers, all of that. So would that be the function of the CFO to come in and say, all right, let's talk about our cybersecurity strategy? And I
Yes.
think a lot of us might be looking to our IT group, and I do that at UT, college one.
Yeah.
Help with this, and like, that's not what I do.
Yes. Absolutely. The CFO's responsibility is to make sure those pieces are in place. I don't expect the CFO to understand everything about cybersecurity, but to make sure the IT team is thinking about it, or if they're not, we're getting the right people in to make sure we have the right things in place. Anyone that is in that position needs to also be able to say, this isn't my skill set, isn't my expertise, but this is important. And we need to make sure that it's happening. So absolutely, every piece of that plan is what they need to be responsible for. I'm gonna go back here and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the cybersecurity side of things, it is a threat for everyone, no matter how big you are. Although the larger you are, I think the more prime you are as a target, and more opportunities that bad people can get into places where they shouldn't be. I would suggest talking to your insurance agent about a cybersecurity policy, because the process to put something like that in place gives a really good detailed outline of the areas that they're concerned about and that you need to be as well. And then you just kind of go down that checklist to make sure that the minimums, those are like the minimums to try and minimize risk, are covered. And then you have some security in place as well as you've improved your operations, and then you can kind of build from there.
Great advice, absolutely. And sometimes just to have this, the insurance, you have to have those minimum things in place. So it's a great starting point. Yes.
So I don't agree that the CFO is the one driving your strategic direction of the company.
Okay.
Okay, I think it depends on what kind of company you have and what the role is. I think that they're the ones talking about the numbers
Yes.
that to drive whatever strategic plan you're coming up with. Depending on your type of organization, they aren't necessarily the ones that are looking at what your marketing and your sales and all those other functions, whether you're manufacturer, distributor, retail, whatever it is. They're there to give you that information you're talking about to make the right decisions for your strategic plan. They're not the ones driving it.
They're not the ones making the decisions. Absolutely. That they can be part of the team. They can be part of the conversation depending on the organization and the way it's structured. They are the ones, I would say, responsible for making sure all the pieces are there. So they need to make sure that the pieces of the plan are in place. Now, are they the ones that oversee, marketing or understand marketing? Perhaps not. There's other people involved, but they need to understand how those pieces fit together, who needs to be talked to, who needs to be accountable for those pieces, and really holding that accountability, I would say. They may not be as involved, but they're the ones that have the biggest picture and should have the most opportunity to be that accountability piece and to bring it all together so that then it's being presented to those key decision makers and all of the information is there. There's probably more people, and I would argue there should be more people in the room throughout those conversations to make sure that those areas are represented and it is a team approach. But I guess I would say that I think they need to be responsible for making sure it's happening. But I would agree, they're not always in the weeds of all of those areas. Depending on how big it is too, they're not getting the time. You're gonna have to have others to be part of it. But someone has to be accountable for it. And I would put your CFO as accountable for it. Yeah. Other questions? How are we on time? We have a few minutes. If we have questions, we have a few minutes. I appreciate your time and attention. If you have any questions, happy to talk about those one-on-one. Here's my contact information. I have some cards up here as well. And we have some flyers if there's anything of interest to anyone, please feel free to take those, but otherwise.
I'd like to maybe ask the room, like who's driving the strategy in your companies? Is it primarily the owners, would you say? Anyone?
You have a board of directors usually.
A board.
I mean, smaller companies the owner does all the roles. If you have a board, they're responsible for putting the strategy, I would say. Supported by the CEO and CFO, most likely.
So who has a board in this room? Do you, would that be someone when you're looking at your board makeup, you would want someone with like a CFO background?
Yeah, well, you can have your own CFO on your board too. That helps. I mean, I'm in private equity, so I'm part of different boards. So I'm not in the day-to-day role like most of the people here. So it's different for me. But I see different size of companies. Some we have CFO, some we don't. I play the role of CFO in some deals because we're smaller, so we need to be looking at the bigger picture. But yeah, overall, the board is great to have. It doesn't have to be 20 people. It could be 4 or 5. Sometimes if it's a smaller company, it's just people that are inside the company, but they take time every month to back up and look at the strategy and look at the big picture, make those decisions as a group.
Yeah, the more you can have a team, the better. Do you have a team? Or most of you feel like you're on an island?
We have family members, so we're kind of on an island, I guess.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of work with our key employees to find out what's going on, and that helps us make our decisions. But family.
Which is, I mean, if family has the skill set to be in those spots, that's fine. But if there's pieces that are missing because that capacity isn't there, then it's great to fill those in. Families should certainly be part of the decisions, family business. But, make sure, again, the right decisions are being made. So decisions are made regardless. Just they go to bed. Yeah, great questioning. Yes.
Lori, I'm going to put you on the spot. So I'm Lori's Chief Strategy Officer at Gross Electric.
Okay.
And, we're in the middle of transitioning from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And Lori, do you want to speak a little bit about the makeup of how we're doing now with you driving the strategy and leadership team working together to execute on that strategy?
Really, just keep me down there.
I'll pay you later.
So, I guess as we've grown, what I've found is that there's lacks in different parts of the team. All right, so there's me driving one way, there's my COO who's driving one way, I've got sales managers driving different ways, operations manager, IT, everybody's operating at a different level. And yet, who's really figuring out the strategy and the direction we're going in? Because all of our people are so involved in day-to-day that we weren't looking at what are we going to do for the future.
Yes.
And the COO is also the controller, CFO, whatever you want to say, and they're very involved in daily stuff. So I hired Jeff to say, as a company, what do we want to do for a strategic direction? And how are we all going to get on the same page to make it happen? Because sometimes we can't do that. We're too much in the weeds. I mean, I've been at the business a long time. There's not much that goes on there that I don't know. But for me to back up and look at the big picture is hard sometimes. So it's nice to bring in somebody to help that happen, to help you really step back and say, all right, you guys, you all have 300 years of experience between all of you, but where are you going? And everybody's looking at them going, we don't know. We're just
Right.
doing what we do every single day.
Yeah,
So somebody's got to walk in sometimes and just back up and go, where are you going and how are you going to get there? Which is why I said I don't necessarily think it's the CFO, because the CFO is in the same weeds that everybody else is. And it's hard to back up. So by him coming in and working with the team, it's really pushing and dragging us into the future.
yeah,
Because, you know, people with 30 years, 40 years, 20 years of experience aren't necessarily willing to open their eyes to a new way to do things. And yet, if we're going to be successful in transitioning, we've got to do that. We can't, you know, that quote is always in my head. If you keep doing the same things the same way, why are you expecting different results?
Yeah.
And so I think about that constantly. Sometimes we need somebody to walk in the door, work with us and just say, I'm shaking it up and it's time to look at things a new way so we can get different results. So that's where it came from.
no, I completely agree with that. I would say it would be great if the CFO could be the ones to hold everyone accountable, but they don't have the capacity to do so, then yes, someone else must come in to do that.
And
Absolutely.
it doesn't have to, you know, we all know consultants. So a lot of times, you know, you have your strategic planning session and you got the consultant and they're helping you. We did that in October of 21, you know, whole strategic planning. And then you go back and everybody does what they've been doing, right? Because, and you just paid this consultant a ton of money
Yeah.
to help your team look different. And they go back and they do the same. So I found that I need somebody in-house who's every week the team meets and every week he's working with them on visioning what the future should be. And that's moving us forward. We've made a lot of changes in the last year, a lot of changes. And he's helped those happen and helped us implement them.
So kudos to you that you recognized that needed to happen.
Yep.
I mean, that's stepping back and saying, I'm too in the weeds, I can't do this, but it needs to happen. That's exactly what has to happen. And sometimes very hard to do, especially when you've done it for so many years, you know, so that's awesome.
I love it. It's like that, like accountability, like someone has to own it. Jeff is going to own it and make sure. I feel like we did the same thing. We went through strategic planning with EOS, which I love the EOS process for strategic planning because it helped us like organize and think things through. But then one change, Kirsten left, and it's like, oh wait, where is that? We did have a plan, you know, we just, it's lost. And like to have someone to own it and help you live it and be accountable for it, I think that's so important. No, and again, we're a staff of 3, so it really doesn't, you're right, to size, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything they want to add about their plan or their vision? Does anyone have a written plan? A written strategic plan?
Is anyone gonna have one now?
We can help.
All I can say is, as I guess, as a buyer of investors into companies, the valuation of your business, if you have those things in place when somebody's looking at your business and you've got the right people, you've got the right information, your CFO knows exactly where to get like it has a lot of value to your business because you're not, when you go somewhere and you look at the books and you're like, whoa, I don't even know where to start, that's not a good sign. Yeah, the bank account looks good, but can you trust the information you're getting? When you have, they're able to show you their strategic planning session, their CFO, their year-end stuff, and it's boom, boom, boom.
Organized.
It brings a lot of confidence to a potential buyer. So for valuation purposes, you're doing your company a big help by putting all these elements in place.
That's a great point, thank you.
I actually have a question. I know maybe everyone wants to be done, but how much do you see with like family businesses intertwining of personal and business finances, and how difficult it is to get someone to back out of that and change their ways? And do you have any suggestions on that?
See it all the time.
Yeah.
In one regard, it's your business, you can do what you want with that money. That's not a business deduction, that's a draw. So in one regard, who are we to say you can't? If it's creating issues, then yeah, it's something that can be discussed, but it's a very difficult thing. I think if it is creating issues, hopefully the easiest way to show these issues is to have some facts, to have some reporting, some information that an outside person or at least a non-family member is presenting, to just kind of go through, hey, this is what's happening, this is the impact of what's happening. These are kind of the suggestions to try to help steer some of that versus just, we can't do this.
Yeah.
But if the money's there and they want to run the business that way, who is someone to tell them not to? I mean, I really do feel that way. You work hard to run your business and to grow your business. But if it's impacting the business, if there's other family members and it's not equitable, then we have issues. And depending on the structure of your business, sometimes your distributions have to be equitable. And now you're creating issues there. If you don't have basis, you're creating taxable issues. So there's a lot of things that can be occurring. So I think every scenario is different, but I think that's also part of a family business
Sure.
and part of what goes along with them.
So I don't know where you're at in transition and all the rest, but sometimes looking at the transition conversation and help change that, because as part of transition, you really have to value the company fairly. And it's very, very hard with buy-sell agreements and all the rest of that to do that if there's a lot of personal stuff coming through the business. So I know in our situation, when I was partners with my brother, we were just starting that process because there was a lot of stuff. And I was saying, as we transition to the next generation, we can't do this because we can't figure out the true value of the company with all this stuff going through.
Yeah.
And so we were just starting those very heated conversations.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, so for the record, the CFO's here, right? I'm also feeling that we're a controller, bookkeeper, CFO, of a unique business model. I wasn't specifically talking about us, for the record, because I have to go.
We're
in
also
with her.
married, so he's
Right,
trying to make
so-
sure that he doesn't get into any trouble
So,
right now.
thank you for that. No, so I've seen that play out though, where like, we've got a recent new client of ours that we're doing the company benefit program for and all that stuff. And gosh, I know this has been talked about so many times, but what is the true value of the business, right? And if you're putting your time, effort, energy, life's work, blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, right? What is the exit strategy, right? And if you use it as your personal piggy bank your entire life, there's no way for Matthew's company to value that business and buy it, right? There's no way, and then if you're not taking the next step, okay, you're not doing that. Well, are you saving money for like retirement so that one day you can just shut the doors and be done with it? And I don't know. Having those conversations can be very difficult and heated, especially if you've got multiple people. I can see the value of having someone from the outside step in and do all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
Now
And
we good.
And at least my perception would be, it's okay to do it as long as it's being categorized and you know what it is.
Yes.
So that when you go to him, you can say, here's what we're pulling out of what is in our financials that we know we've done. All right, it's not just all intermingled and there's 15 company cars and 4 of them are salespeople and 6 of them are ours.
Yes.
We can't break that out, but I think that is, and we started trying to define exactly what it is we were pulling out, so we would be able to say, here's all this, EBITDA is great, but there's nothing in EBITDA called family finances, right?
Right.
So I think we need to make sure we focus on which part of that is also family finances, so.
Yes.
Is that EBITDA?
That's very true. If you're gonna do it, it needs to be done.
Trademark it.
Yeah.
Trademark it, write a book on